but we're going to come back again, and this time the context is in Ukraine. And what's the reporting? Well, first of all, it's now becoming recognized around the globe that Ukraine is in trouble with the counteroffensive. Here's the New York Times. Ukrainian troops trained by the West stumble in battle. Very interesting term. Ukraine's army has now set aside US fighting methods and reverted to tactics it knows best. So the Ukrainians, given what I'm calling a hodgepodge of weapons, many of them substandard and old, are expected to fight prepared Russian defences with no air cover, something the US would never do under any circumstance, but they expect the Ukrainians to do that and to die as a consequence.
And that New York Times headline, Brian, that seemed to blame the Ukrainians. It's not blaming the Western tactics. It's not blaming the Western advisors for maybe using tactics that only work with air cover and air superiority, which the Ukrainians don't have. The inference is somehow the Ukrainians are substandard.
I think your observation is correct, David, and we're going to lead, we'll be coming out of this segment with a comment about Zelensky himself, but it does appear that as the Ukrainian offensive is showing itself to be weak and failing, so Western media is beginning to back away from Ukraine. But let's bring in the BBC, because fascinating article went up a couple of days ago. Ukraine counteroffensive against Russia yields only small gains in the first 2 months. So the inference from this is that the counteroffensive is going to last a lot longer, when many commentators believe that the offensive is dying as we watch it. Small gains, well, what are those? But this is the BBC, known for its propaganda and bias, but look what it's doing with a standard report. It's now got a verify stamp on it. And let's have a listen or watch this little video clip and get a feel for how the BBC deals with really important subjects.
Ukraine launched its counteroffensive in June, but is it making any real progress? We've had a close look at 3 pieces of evidence from the battlefield. Let's start with mines. This is the first line of Russian defense just south of the city of Orikhiv, and it's heavily mined. We verified this drone footage that shows what happened when the Ukrainians ran into one of those minefields. It shows why the Ukrainians are advancing so much slower than a lot of people had hoped. Secondly, the Russians have been surprisingly innovative in defense. They've got this weapon, the Alligator, the Ka-52 attack helicopter. This is a propaganda film by the Russian Ministry of Defense showing it firing a missile. We geolocated this to the Ukrainian village of Zadyeva. So what does Ukraine have in its favor? Well, one answer is high-quality Western-supplied weaponry, like, for example, the British-supplied Storm Shadow missile. Ukraine's aim is to try and weaken Russia's defenses from within. Now, we verified this footage of a long-range missile strike on the Chonar Bridge. The problem for Ukraine is that in 3 months' time, the rainy season will have arrived, making advances difficult. So while Ukraine is making progress, it's very slow to show tangible results.
So now we've got slow to show tangible results, but what mastery of spin by the BBC, because of course 3 critical things, apparently the mines, and what they showed you then was not maps of the mined areas, they showed you maps of the overall Russian defences, which include mined areas. But of course, the viewer would not know this was what the BBC was doing. We've got the BBC talking about innovative weapons systems, anti-tank helicopters, been around since the Cold War, so there's nothing innovative here. What the BBC didn't want to comment on, though, was, of course, the target of the Russian missile from the helicopter was Ukrainian armour, which is being slaughtered on the battlefield as a result of these very capable weapons systems. And then lastly, we attempt to spin back to the great Western weapons by the talk of the British Storm Shadow missiles. No mention of the fact that very few of these missiles have got through, largely due to the Russian anti-aircraft defences and their electronic warfare prowess. But the BBC spinning the subject. And if we bring the reporter back on screen, let's just add a bit more into this if we can. Okay, let's see what's going to happen here. Apologies for that. We seem to have a small issue with the slide transfer at the moment. Oh, it's finally come in. So think about what he's saying. He's picking out 3 items which he's being particularly disingenuous in reporting, but this is the BBC's excuse for Ukraine making slow progress. And I'm going to call this cognitive dissonance, because the BBC knows that Ukraine is not making progress on the battlefield, but they're not allowed to report that, and this causes problems for their reporters. So the other bit is that what we're seeing here is a spin to achieve the political opinion. Now, if you want the facts and the truth about what's happening on the battlefield, I am suggesting that you absolutely go to alternative media. Weeb Union, mentioned many times. We've also got the Free Russia channel. We've also got Defence Politics Asia, and we've got the Military Summary channel. And the big difference about these people, apologies for that, is that they are reporting from the front by the hour, the day, the week and a month. So the BBC, with a multi-billion-pound budget, can't report the facts, whereas these individual analysts working on social media are clearly getting information which is coming direct from the front. Let's have a look at this little embedded video clip here, which of course the BBC doesn't want to talk about. And this is the fact that not only is Western equipment being destroyed, it's being captured. This is a British Mastiff vehicle, and it's one of an increasing number of Western vehicles that are now coming into Russian hands as they are damaged, but often just abandoned on the battlefield. So if we come back to the BBC report, well, the thing they major in on is that time's not on Ukraine's side, and then they start bringing in the US presidential election cycle. If Ukraine cannot show any decisive gains on the battlefield by then, it's far from certain that US and NATO support will continue at their current high levels. So the only reason that the Ukrainians are fighting and dying is that this is a tool to support Biden in his elections. Unbelievably callous and cruel, but this is the reality of it. And if we have a look at the Wall Street Journal, they at least report the truth. Ukraine's stalled offensive puts Biden in an uneasy political position. And just to end on the point that you alluded to, really, David, many people are now starting to say that Zelensky is looking as if he is moving towards the end of his tenure. Some people have suggested that he will be eliminated, with whatever that means, but many people are saying that he will shortly be abandoned by the West as having failed. And I'll just end this segment by saying a big thank you to the gentleman who sent me in this information from UK Defence Matters, pointing out that as the fear of war against Russia is ramped up, we can't even train our own RAF pilots. So, David, a pretty mixed bag there, but it's clear that the BBC is floundering now in what it can report about Ukraine.
Well, it's not informing people. I mean, this is the thing, they're meant to inform, entertain, and inspire, or whatever their spiel is. They're not informing people. To get information, we're having to go to these alternative media sources, and they're excellent and they're detailed, and you can get commentary from various perspectives, pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, and more neutral. But the information, the data, is very good, and you can form an independent view. The BBC don't allow that.
Indeed not. Well, let's bring Mark back on screen. And